So, today we're diving into one of the most fascinating and frankly mysterious civilizations of the ancient world. Picture this, a massive urban empire, way ahead of its time, but they did it all without the usual suspects. No kings, no grand palaces, no evidence of big armies. The big question is, how on earth did they pull that off?
And that, right there, is the central puzzle of the Indus Valley Civilization. I mean, how do you coordinate huge cities and super complex trade networks across a territory this big and leave behind zero evidence of kings, no royal tombs, almost no signs of war? It just doesn't fit the mold.
You know, for more than 700 years, during the Bronze Age, these guys were on top of their game. They thrived, their cities were absolute marvels of engineering and planning. And then, poof, they just sort of faded away, leaving behind one of history's biggest vanishing acts.
Okay, this slide really lays it all out. Think about it. While Egypt and Mesopotamia were busy building these colossal monuments to their gods and kings, pyramids, ziggurats, you name it, the Indus people were focused on something else entirely. They were building monuments to public health. Things like incredible water systems, public baths, wells for everyone. Their whole set of priorities was just completely different.
So, where did this totally unique society even come from? Well, it definitely wasn't an overnight thing, not a sudden revolution. As we're about to see, it was this really slow, steady burn, an evolution that started in tiny farming villages almost 4,000 years before their great cities even existed.
Yeah, this timeline, it really puts things into perspective, doesn't it? The journey begins way back around 7000 BCE with the very first farming villages. It took more than 4 millennia of gradual progress in pottery, in planning, in trade, before we even get to the famous mega-cities like Mohenjo-Daro. So this wasn't some flash in the pan. We're talking about a civilization built on incredibly deep, ancient foundations.
And places like Mehrgarh are so important because they're basically the origin story. This is ground zero. It's where all the essential building blocks were put into place, learning to grow barley and wheat, domesticating cattle, and developing those first crafts that would, thousands of years later, become the signature of their amazing cities.
And wow, look at what those foundations led to. I mean, the mature Indus cities were just masterpieces of urban planning. We're talking grid patterns, streets aligned perfectly, and everything. From the standardized bricks, they all had the same 1:2:4 ratio, to citywide sewer systems, it all just screams an unbelievable level of coordination and a real focus on public order.
Right, so this amazing level of organization, it wasn't just for looks. It was the engine that powered a massive economic powerhouse, one built on serious industry and far-reaching trade.
And just to give you a sense of the sheer scale here, we're talking about a civilization that covered more than 1 million square kilometers. To put that in perspective, that is bigger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. So the fact that they could maintain standards across that huge an area, it's just mind-boggling. And we know for a fact they were big players on the world stage. It's not just guesswork. We've found records from Mesopotamia, like this cuneiform tablet, and it talks about trading with a far-off land called Meluha. And yep, you guessed it, scholars are pretty much certain that Meluha was their name for the Indus Valley.
And the way they managed all this trade was incredibly sophisticated. They had standardized weights to make sure every deal was fair. They used these little stone seals, think of them almost like ancient corporate logos, to stamp their goods and show who owned what. And from bustling port cities like Lothal, they shipped out goods like cotton, beautiful carnelian beads, and ivory to the rest of the ancient world. Which, of course, brings us right back to that central mystery. How in the world do you run a society that's this complex, this standardized, and this wealthy, with no king calling the shots? Okay, this table just lays out the paradox so clearly. On one hand, you have all this evidence for some kind of central control, right? The standardized bricks, the weights, the citywide planning. But then you look at the other side and nothing. All the classic signs of a king are just missing. No palaces, no fancy royal tombs, no giant statues of some ruler. It's a real head-scratcher. So instead, the evidence seems to point to a society built more on a shared idea of civic order. Maybe power wasn't in the hands of one person. Maybe it was run by committees, or powerful merchant guilds, or even councils of priests, groups that cared more about public works and social harmony than about building monuments to themselves. Now, the biggest clue we have to solving this entire mystery might just be their writing system. But there's one tiny problem. We can't read a single word of it. The Indus script, which we find on thousands of those little seals, is still one of the world's great unsolved codes. It's like their whole story, their politics, their beliefs, is locked away and we just can't find the key.
So, the other big question is, what happened? Where did they go? For a long time, the popular theory was some kind of sudden, catastrophic collapse. But a lot of modern evidence points to something different, a much slower, more gradual decline, driven mainly by Mother Nature.
It looks like it happened in stages. First, the monsoons, which were the lifeblood of their agriculture, started to get weaker and less reliable. Then, some of their most important rivers literally started to dry up. That made farming on a huge scale pretty much impossible. So what did people do? They started abandoning the big cities and moving to smaller, more manageable villages. It was less of an apocalypse and more of a transformation.
And you can see that shift right here. As the climate got drier, the population in those big cities started to shrink. But at the very same time, the number of people living in smaller rural villages grew a lot. Basically, that whole big centralized city model just wasn't working anymore, so they adapted to a more decentralized, farm-based life.
It's incredible to think that for thousands of years, this entire civilization was just lost to history, completely forgotten. So its rediscovery in the 20th century was a massive event, a total shock to the system. And honestly, we're still figuring out its true legacy today.
Yeah, it wasn't until the 1920s, when archaeologists started digging seriously at sites like Harappa, that the world finally learned about this forgotten Bronze Age superpower. And when the official announcement came out in 1924, it completely rewrote the history books for South Asia.
And their legacy is still with us in subtle ways. For instance, they were the pioneers of growing and weaving cotton. Their whole focus on water and ritual bathing, that might have laid the groundwork for ideas in later Indian religions. And today, when we look at their incredibly sophisticated water management, well, there are some powerful lessons there for our own cities.
So in the end, the Indus people left us their story. It's a story that's written not just in words we can't read, yet, but in the language of their city grids, their clean water systems, and those thousands of mysterious symbols. Their script may be silent, but their ruins, they speak